Welcome to Arby's Kitchen Talk, and a very special welcome to my guest, Dr. Robin Wiley. Thank you for being with me. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, our topic this evening is the relationship box. And I'm certain that by the end of this segment, everyone will know what that box is and what it means. And so I'm excited to delve into our discussion. Before we get there, though, I want you to tell us just a little bit about who Dr. Wiley is.
Okay, so so a different. I think I'm different things on many different days. So I am a practicing therapist. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm licensed in the state of New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. I am in my 27th year as a social worker. I have my bachelor's degree in social work from Virginia State University and HBCU.
All
And
right.
I have my MSW and my doctorate in social work from Rutgers University.
All right.
Um,
All right.
and so I have a private practice in South Jersey in Cherry Hill. And I also have a group practice now that's been established for close to 2 years now, where we, work with individuals who are dealing with depression, anxiety, life stress. I also have a YouTube channel. I do a show weekly called Let's Talk with Dr. Robin, where I talk about various things related to mental health and overall wellness. So, please, check that out,
Yes.
subscribe, share.
Yes.
And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Um,
Good. I didn't
so
realize
yeah,
that.
so
Okay.
so very busy, very busy. But I'm
Yes.
so happy to be here, and I hope we have people that are tuning in because I hope they'll get some really good information
I'm
tonight.
certain. I'm certain they will because I know that you're an excellent therapist. So let's get going. All right.
Thank you. All right.
So my first question to you is, how does or to what extent does our childhood upbringing affect us as adults in relationships?
Oh, well, I think greatly, greatly. So one of the things we want to think about is that our first sort of orientation to relationships happens in our families. It happens with those relationships that we have with our parents or our family of origin. So it may not be parents, it could be, grandparents, it could be a guardian, whomever, but those are our first relationships. So however those relationships manifest definitely impacts us throughout our life. It shows us, how we interact
Hmm.
with people. That's where we get our self-esteem. That's where we learn how to be loved or how, maybe not to be loved. And so what I find, when I'm working with the clients is there is some benefit in looking at those past relationships that have happened in their earlier life,
Hmm.
and looking at some of the messages that are coming from those relationships and how they're manifesting now in their current relationships. So it
Right.
definitely has a great impact.
So if it's been a great relationship early on, chances are, and I know there are a number of environmental factors, that
Mhm.
happen, that transpire in a person's life, but there's a good opportunity or good chance for healthier relationships if the home life growing up was for the most part healthy and balanced and so forth.
Right. And it's not to say that, we have to grow up with like perfect parents or perfect guardians. We know that a lot of us grow up in non-traditional types of families. The idea though is that, hopefully it is there are healthy relationships that have evolved when you're a child.
Hmm.
However, this doesn't mean that we can't overcome some of the issues that we've maybe faced in childhood.
Okay.
And a lot of times that's what prompts people to come to therapy. That's what, being in current relationships, a lot of times is what causes people to realize, wait a minute, I've got some unresolved stuff going on from when I was a kid.
Right.
And in some of those relationships, with our caretakers, whoever was supposed to take
Sure.
care.
Sure. So now that's going to lead me to the next question.
Okay.
This whole emotional intelligence, which I've been hearing a whole
Yes.
bunch about. So the question is, what is it? How does it? How does someone obtain it? I mean, are they born with this? And how beneficial is it, particularly in a relationship?
So, okay, so one, emotional intelligence is essentially how we handle our emotions. So it's like our ability to handle emotions, to recognize what we're feeling. And when I mean handle emotions, I mean like handle them appropriately, and to identify our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I want to say first is that most people, even adults, don't have a vast emotional vocabulary. We still kind of deal with mad, sad, glad. Those are kind of the words that we're more familiar with.
Okay.
And we also have to think about, when we grow up, how we are, again, how that orientation is, to life,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of whether we're encouraged to express our emotions or whether we're not. And so many times we grow up in households where emotions aren't talked about, feelings are not spoken about or whatever. And so, or there isn't space to really talk about your feelings. So all of that can impact our emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence is essentially your ability to be able to handle how you feel,
Mm.
to know how to, because we have to think about how we feel causes us to respond.
Right.
We respond based on our feelings, and so a lot of times those feelings don't always come from situations that are presented right in front of us. They oftentimes come from situations from the past, something that might remind us of something else.
Okay.
um, and sometimes we don't handle our feelings well. um, where does it come from?
Yeah.
So we learn this in various ways. Certainly, childhood experiences play a part in this. What's reinforced positively or negatively, whether we're encouraged to express ourselves. I want to add, and I think I'm sure we'll get into this later, but gender, and gender roles has a big part in that.
Mm-hmm.
We still live in a society where those who identify with the female gender are very much encouraged to express emotions, as where those who identify with the male gender are not necessarily encouraged. We're still fascinated when we see like a man cry on in the public eye or whatever. It's like, oh my god, like it's amazing. When and so I often say this, that we're still not raising boys to feel comfortable with feelings and feel comfortable expressing their feelings. And one of the biggest complaints that when I do couples counseling that women have with their male partners, if that's the case, is they don't talk about how they feel.
Right.
So, so it's not just, so we need to make sure that we are um, helping children in particular to realize that emotions are a part of us. We have various emotions, day to day, because we're living day to day, we're experiencing things. And they impact how we respond to situations. And so they're important. And it's important for us to know how to, not just to acknowledge what our feelings are, but also how to regulate our feelings. And that's something that we learn very early on. You think about a toddler, you think about children when they're younger and how they may have a tantrum and that type of thing. And so how we respond to that, how we address that with them, is teaching them some things about how to regulate their own emotions.
Okay, so let's talk about the gender differences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, when we talk about the difference between men and women and being able to express themselves, and how sometimes it's much more easier for women, and I think it probably is. It's why is it so difficult? Is it really because of the way we've been taught, the culture to, hold your feelings in, to not cry? Because there are some men who are able to articulate how they feel. I mean, you may not find very many,
But there
but
are some. Yeah, I
there
agree.
are some who, you can ask them how they're feeling, and they will say, you know what, I had well, you know what? Maybe it's not how I'm feeling. It's what happened. Because you'll say, how are you feeling? And they
Mm-hmm.
would say, I had a bad day.
Right. So that's not necessarily the feeling.
Right.
That's the trigger for the feelings.
For the feeling. So
Or okay, no, go on. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
so how is it then that some men are able to just, tell you how they feel? Is it because of the upbringing, or can we at some point regulate or develop that skill so that so that men are much more emotionally intelligent? Can they develop the skill? And then can women sort of monitor, or adjust their emotional intelligence somewhat so that it's more balanced in a relationship?
Right. So I absolutely believe that people can learn that skill, men in particular. And I think some men may consciously, have decided to say, I'm going to express my emotion. Because here's the thing, like, it's not that men don't express emotions at all. I think they possibly express the emotion, the most, maybe a more powerful emotion, or the emotion that's more acceptable, which sometimes can be anger, because anger is an emotion that is okay to express a lot of, or at least let me say this from a, maybe the message, the more implicit message is that anger is okay to express. But we know that anger is more like a secondary emotion. So it's usually not the primary. So there's usually something else going on. It's just that anger is what's comfortable to express, and anger is what's more acceptable.
Okay.
So, so versus, let's say, if somebody's embarrassed, if someone's embarrassed and they may express anger, but it's really embarrassment. So a lot of times it's about helping people to understand what is the real feeling that you have behind the anger feeling. So I do feel like, yes, you can learn that, because the other thing is about the balance. Like, so, and I don't want to, I hate to peg us like in these, because, gender roles, they limit us. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is, and I'm not talking about, so you got to think there's a difference between biological sex, which is basically about anatomy, and gender roles. Like, if no one told you you were a female, and because you're a female, you need to act like this, then how would life be different for us? You know what I mean? So oftentimes we're sort of pigeonholing ourselves, I would say is the term, into these, how we should act because I'm a woman or because I'm a man. And so that's where we get into toxic masculinity, and we can get into, women, feeling like, well, these are the different things. And that kind of gets me into the relationship box too, that these are certain things I have to have because I'm a woman, or things that I shouldn't be doing because I'm a woman. But on the flip side of this, with women and emotions,
Yes.
we also see that in particular with women of color, that it's not that we're not emotional, but women oftentimes we're like, I don't have time to cry. I don't have time because I have to do X, Y, and Z. So even with women, we may have, or I can't cry in front of people. I can't show people this vulnerability, that type of thing. Even if it's people that we're very close to, we oftentimes are dealing with that because we feel like, well, I have work to do, and don't get me wrong, that is some historical generational trauma that we carry, especially as people of African descent, based on the fact that, our ancestors, working in fields and picking cotton and everything, didn't have time to address whatever feelings or emotions they had related to their plight. They had to just keep on moving, or the separation and all that kind of stuff. So, there's a lot of things that are at play here. And that's not to take away things that are at play, I think for Black men and women in particular, or any, people of color who have faced any kind of more generational trauma, the trauma that is kind of, now research shows that it's basically part of our DNA. And so we have these sort of coping strategies that are not always applicable, but they're a part of us because they're a part of our history.
Well, it's so interesting that you would say that, because it hasn't been for a very long period of time that I've actually understood exactly what you're saying, because depending upon, how you've grown up, you don't think about how you feel or how you react as something that's generational or something that's in your DNA. You just assume that you are who you are because of who you are. Maybe we reach back to a mother or father or an uncle or a grandmother, but it's rare that we think about the fact that we have longevity through our ancestors that have created this person who responds and acts the way they do, maybe not necessarily because of a childhood trauma, but because of our heritage.
Right.
And so understanding that, how we evolved is so important in terms of being emotionally aware of who we are, and emotionally intelligent, that we didn't just come into existence. And the fact that we have these issues is reasonable. It's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that, right?
Right. And acknowledgement is like half the battle. You know what I mean? Like, to be walking around in our skin and walking around on this earth and to not acknowledge like, okay, you know what, this might be something that I do that's, because it's all about like, is it working for me now? Did it work for me then? Something, a way that I may have had to survive or a coping strategy that I had in childhood, is that something I need to apply to what's going on with me in my relationships now? And is it still applicable?
Right.
And so that's kind of like where the work is done oftentimes.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm with you. So far, I'm with you.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we're getting there. We're getting really close. So men and women are most definitely different. And I think we could probably, if we had a pen and pencil, we could write down a number of ways. But as the expert on this subject, can you tell me just a few of the ways that we're different? Because we're coming into a relationship, right, where we're supposed to be one. We're supposed to be able to get along, but we're coming together different. So, what are some of the ways that we're different? And if you're a man or a woman, tell us a little bit about how men are different from women and vice versa.
So one of the things I think is the basic that we're oriented differently to the world. You know what I mean? And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the emotions piece. In relationships, emotions are a part of a relationship. Like you can't leave that out. You can't, I don't feel like you can. And so how we express ourselves is very different. There was that whole thing back in the day, the books and stuff, I think it was men are from Venus, women are from Mars, one or the other. I can't remember who was from where, but it was basically the fact that, we're almost coming from. So that to me is like sort of the symbolism of we're coming from different orientations to life. And the expectations are different for us. And so I think the way men and women communicate can be different, but I've also found that there isn't really like this definite, there's no concrete or conclusive, I should say, differences that you can say, oh, all men are this way and all women are this way. Like I really try to stay away from that, because I've seen couples where, there's almost like a role reversal in terms of what we would expect from, the female in the group and it's different from what the male is presenting with. So it's almost like a gender switch. And again, we're talking gender. So, we're leaving out other couples that, are same sex couples or what have you. But I think what happens is people are often, because you also have to take into consideration, we're also bringing in our past to our current relationships. We are. That stuff floats to the top. So anything that is not resolved, we find out about it pretty quickly. So if we have issues with, attachment, if we have issues with, even like jealousy, commitment, any of those kinds of things, wherever that may come from, it's going to float to the top when you're in a relationship. Right. So, but I think a basic thing is a lot of times how we express ourselves, often, and I mean, and I hate to like stereotype, but, men are very much like, more, maybe a little bit more concrete, more like, they want peace. They want peace. They, it's like, don't make any waves, that type of thing. Women, and I say this as a woman, we are like, let's talk it through. I think we're going through this. Let's have the, I was reading this article last week. It was saying X, Y, and Z. I did this checklist. Where are we falling in terms of our love languages? And so even though I don't think we're meaning to start up something, but I think men can interpret that like, why are we talking about this? Like, we're fine. So, and especially if, the person is on like a journey to, wellness, you know what I mean? We want everything in our life to contribute to that, our relationships too. So oftentimes, that can be tough. I mean, I will say, not trying to put my own personal business out there, but, it's definitely not easy being in a relationship with a therapist.
Okay.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I think you can have its perks, but it's definitely probably not the easiest. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so sometimes, we have to think like you talking about two people coming together and each person is bringing their own stuff with them. So it's like moving into a room together and you each have your own luggage. Now, granted, It doesn't mean that it's all bad stuff. That's not necessarily the case. Some of it can be great stuff. Hopefully people complement each other and that type of thing. But we do have to recognize the nuances that are associated with, traditional male and female gender roles and with that person, their personality. And I do want to say, I think oftentimes we do not take the time to get to know each other. And you'll hear me talk about that more when we get to the relationship.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we do not take enough time. And I think that is that's something we do here more in America. I think in other cultures and other countries, people have to go through a lot more courting, and for your younger people that may be watching that don't know what courting is, I want you to Google that word and see what it means. But courting is,
Yes.
it's like kind of like dating, but it's a way of, taking your time to get to know the person. And we don't always, we tend to jump in. And so, and we ignore some of the flags and some of the signs and that type of thing. That can cause us some problems down the road.
I agree. One of the things that suggestions or recommendations I've given my sons is to make sure that whoever it is a friend, is a good friend, is your best friend, someone who on a number of different levels, because you want to be able to go back, with difficult times and know who it is you're dealing with, not be surprised. And I know that there's another dynamic when marriage comes into play, but you want to be able to know this person, what their likes and dislikes are, when they're angry, how they respond when they're depressed. You want to know who you're getting to marry before you do so.
Right.
So
Plus you're establishing that foundation. You need that foundation. And so I think, what keeps people together, because, if you've been in a relationship with somebody for a long time, everything's not always going to be, roses. It's going to be, there's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows to the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think keeps people in the relationship is that they have a foundation there. So this person just beyond the role that they play in your life. The goodness in them. They know the goodness in you. Love plays a part in that, but love is not what keeps people together.
Okay.
I know people may not agree with me on that, but I think those people who are older will recognize love is not all you need.
Exactly.
It's a part of it. I think it's part of the adhesive. It's the adhesive. But what keeps you in a relationship is that work. You have to work. Relationships don't just maintain themselves. And oftentimes people are, and this kind of gets me into it. I'm that relationship box thing.
So let's go there.
Yeah.
Let's go there.
Perfect,
Let's go
perfect.
there.
Let's
Perfect.
go there.
Yes.
Let's let the cat out the bag about the relationship.
Okay,
box.
go ahead.
So this
now I'm going to take some notes because you've said something that's really piqued my interest. So go ahead. I'm listening.
All right.
We're listening.
So, so the relationship box is sort of a metaphor that I use when I'm working with clients, and I think even if clients are not coming in for couples therapy, even if they whatever they're coming in to talk about, oftentimes relationships do come up in that. And so the relationship box is something I talk about, people walking around, women in particular, walking around with this imaginary, like I said, it's a more metaphorical type of thing, this imaginary relationship box. You're walking around like, I want a relationship. I need a relationship. And so you're walking around seeing who can just jump in that box, who will fit in that box. Not thinking about and there's not thinking about does your box fit them? You know what I mean? And what does a relationship for you really need to look like? Your expectations, what are your negotiables, your non-negotiables, all those types of things that need to fit in, that's what that box needs to be made of. However, if our focus is, I just need to be in a relationship, and don't get me wrong, I think at certain ages, everybody's been there. You know what I mean? Where you're like, I just want to be in a relationship with somebody. Mm-hmm. Then you'll accept anybody. You'll accept whoever jumps in that box. You're like, okay, here we go. You're in my box, and we're going forward.
Right.
The problem with it is that when you choose just anybody, we're missing. We're more focused on being in a relationship and less focused on is this person appropriate for me? Is this person good for me? Do they contribute to my wellness? Am I contributing to their wellness? What does it really look like? Are we, and you miss some of the red flags because your whole focus is just on being with somebody. So that's when you hear people talk about, they'll describe their relationship and they describe all of these toxic characteristics and different things that are going, but then they're like, well, but I gotta, I'm with him. And that's it. And it's like, but you don't have to be, or with her. I mean, I'm not saying that men don't walk around. Men may have that same idea too. I found it more with, my female clients that I've worked with, because I think part of it is the expectations that are placed on us. Like, when women of a certain age, you get to a certain age, you feel like, oh, you're supposed to be married, or you're supposed to be, so you got to be in a relationship to get to the marriage part.
Right.
And we could almost call it the marriage box too, and I think some of that comes from, when we were kids. I mean, I don't know if kids still do this now. But when you're a kid and you're in elementary school and you're drawing a little heart on your notepad with the names in it, me and whoever, whatever, and this whole idea, when we even see like what's portrayed in the media, like when you watch, these sort of like, romantic comedies or what have you. And at the end, the woman is lonely and she meets somebody, and it's almost like the fairy tales that we, read as kids. Sure. And so all of that sends messages to us as women in particular that, there's certain things that are supposed to happen in my life at a certain time. And so you see women really getting caught up with, oh, I'm almost 30 and I'm not married, or I don't have children, or these types of things. And it's not to take away from anyone that wants that. It's not about whether you want it or not. It's about the idea of making sure you're being discriminate in terms of who you choose to be with.
Okay. So how do you decide what those negotiable items are? How do you begin to make that, or to not make the list, but to be open, I'm assuming, so that, you're not accepting someone that's not for you, but at the same time, having a standard.
Right. And I'm not going to say don't make the list. I think somewhere you need to have a list.
Okay.
I think somewhere that needs, because if you don't know what it is you need in a relationship or what you're looking for, then how are you going to know when you get it?
Okay.
Or if you have it already.
All right.
You know what I mean? So you don't want to wait, and so I think oftentimes, people will go from one relationship to another and not always recognize the patterns. So sometimes, we learn from the patterns of our relationships, but we have to pay attention. We have to take a moment and acknowledge, like, okay, if all your relationships have sort of gone in one direction, or all the people that you dated have been a certain type of person or whatever, that's less about them and more about you. Oftentimes we'll think it's about them, but it's not, because you're choosing those people. You know what I mean? You're the common, whoever the person, you're the common factor. And I,
right.
use, in general, but, so we have to be mindful of that. So a lot of times if somebody's coming out of a relationship that didn't go well or what have you, then, as a therapist, I will have them to talk about, like, well, what is it that you're expecting from your partner? What is it that you feel like you need from them? What type of characteristics, what type of qualities? Because all those things need to be a factor. Now, where do we get that from? From a lot of places. You know what I mean? For me personally, it is the men that I have grown up with. It's my father, my stepfather, uncles. It's the men that I've seen who have possessed characteristics of what I consider a good man.
Oh, right.
And so they set that example. Now, here's the reality. Everybody doesn't have that.
Right.
Everybody doesn't have that experience.
That's
true.
I
feel very blessed that I've had that experience. But everybody doesn't have it. So sometimes, we have to kind of like we have to go to the drawing board and say, well, wait a minute. What is it that I feel like I need? What is it that I feel like I deserve? And so that's where our worth comes in, how you want to be treated, because all those things play a part in that.
Right.
So again, we go back to some childhood experiences, some, young adolescent experiences with the people in our lives. And we have to be mindful of the patterns too in our relationships. So that's another thing that kind of can help us to establish, okay, the last 2 or 3 relationships I was in have been like this person has been manipulative, or we argued a lot or whatever. So looking at that and then making a decision, moving into a relationship, these are the things that I need, or this is what I need communication to be better. I need this person to be able to, and sometimes it can be tangible and sort of like intangible things. So the tangible, of course, is where people get into, income and education, and, this person has to have a job, all that kind of stuff, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. However, sometimes, there may be a little bit of negotiation there. It depends.
Okay.
And then you get into the intangible things, which might be where, well, this person needs to be able to communicate. I need them to have, pretty good emotional intelligence to be able to handle their emotions. This person needs to be kind. This person needs to be, caring. So it's also, so part of it is recognizing who you are as a person. And that's why it's always helpful for us to take some time in between relationships versus going from one to the next one. Take a little time, get to know yourself, get to know what's been going on. I think particularly when you're younger, because, that's kind of our learning ground. That time when we're younger, when we're in like our 20s, teens and 20s and maybe 30s, and you have an increasing amount of folks in that generation that have basically decided not to be in what we would consider traditional relationships. Like we have an increase. It's interesting because we have an increase in people who probably have made a conscious decision, like not to be married, not to have kids. But also I was checking out some statistics, but actually in 2020, there was an increase in actual marriages.
Okay.
So, but I do feel like that was some pandemic stuff going on.
Okay.
But, you know what I mean? Because, because they can easily and I was looking at the National Institute of Health and based on the census and all that kind of stuff. But what happens is that I also feel like, that's something that is easy to track. It's not always easy to track like the amount of breakups that happened during the pandemic, where people were stuck inside because and I thought about this, during the time of the pandemic, because people as couples that are typically leaving the home, getting that sort of mental break from each other, were no longer getting that break. And so we see a lot of relationships did not make it.
Okay.
As a result of that. Not necessarily marriages, but, apparently not necessarily marriages.
Right.
But,
Now, you said something interesting about how love is what is the adhesive, but that it is the work that couples are required to do in order to stay together. Can you talk about that? Because I have a number of girlfriends that have that as it's their banner. You've got to do the work, that you can't just expect a relationship to work on its own, or just to manifest. It takes the work of two people who are committed. So talk to us about that.
Yes. So first, let me say relationships are hard. They're not easy. You know what I mean? I think what happens is we find that out when you talk to couples who've been together like, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, and that's amazing. And we're all like amazing. And then, if you sit down and you talk to them, and they're not going to say to you, oh, the relationship has always been fantastic. They're going to talk to you about like, oh, I remember we were going through this rough patch for like a few years and I thought I was ready to leave. But what has happened is that that work is communicating, and it's also sticking with somebody. You know what I mean? And so and don't get me wrong, like it depends on the dynamics of the relationship. You know what I mean? So if someone's abusive, that type of thing, if there's that level of hurt and pain that's going on, then yes, no, that's not something you want to stick with. However, if it's a relationship where for the most part things are okay, but there are these rough patches or there are these times when, okay, something might be lacking, because we have to think as we're going through life and you're going through life with a partner, we're experiencing things. You know what I mean? There's different things that happen. If somebody talks about the trajectory of their life, and take that, add a relationship to that, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be good times, bad times, indifferent times, what have you. The work is staying committed. And so whether that is communicating about what's going on, communicating our needs, reestablishing some things in the relationship, maybe they're, a lot of times when people, they have kids early on. So the focus really becomes on the children. And then when the children are grown, or I would say not grown, but on their way out the house, or the children are now teenagers, that's when people realize, wait a minute, because we haven't necessarily worked on our relationship, now who am I sitting in front of every day? Because now we don't have the kids as the focus. Right. And that's why it's important for people that have children to still work on their relationship. Because that relationship is first of all, the relationship that you have is what you're showing to your children. So if you're arguing, if you're getting along well, whatever it is, you are showing that to your children, and you're teaching your children how to be in a relationship. Sure. Whether that's functional or dysfunctional. So I think that's a part of it. I also feel like, and I just lost my train of thought. So hold on.
It's okay.
Look, I'm like, because I'm going in so many different directions.
It was good. So it's putting it, you were talking about putting in the
Right,
work.
in the work. So the other part of the work is, communication. It's about communicating things, like talking to each other and being honest about what's going on, whether it's with you personally, what you feel is going on in the relationship, and doing that in a way. So it's twofold. It's communicating your needs, but it's also on the partner's part to listen. Okay, they may not agree, like you may not agree on things, but to listen. You want to create space for each other where you can communicate about things.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is what helps couples to be able to, stay together, stay the course, so to speak. But there's things that, so like I said, there's that foundation. So that foundation is, that you love this person. So you love this person that you want to be in it with them. You know what I mean? You want to share life with them. And we have to make sure that that's coming from a true place and not from a place of convenience or because we had the relationship box. And so we're trying to make something work with somebody just because we don't want to be not in a relationship. There should be mutual gratification and mutual, commitment to each other on whatever level. And that doesn't always mean that things are always going to be 50-50. It doesn't mean that. We know people go through different things. So as an individual, you go through things, and we need to recognize how that can impact being in the relationship with someone. Okay. But it is work. It is work. But I think it's worth it. The work is worth it because you love the person, you care about them, you want the best for them, and you want the best for your relationship. So when I work with people, I often have them to create, when couples, I often have them create a vision for their relationship.
Okay.
Because to me, it's almost like setting your intentions. If you set what that vision is and what your intentions are, then that'll guide your behavior. Because then you look at, is what I'm doing day to day in this relationship contributing to the vision that we have for our relationship collectively? And making sure you and your partner are on the same page with that. So it is. It's a lot. It's a lot to it. But it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like this painstaking thing, because relationships, although they can be hard, it shouldn't be like hard for you to do what you need to do. That's the key. So yeah. And I think about it like this, if you live in a house and there's something going on with the electrical in your house, you don't just get rid of your house. Usually fix it. Right. So we need to sometimes apply that same mentality to relationships, especially if a relationship is worth it. And that's something we have to determine individually. You know what I mean? And the other thing too is we got to keep other people out of our relationships.
That's good.
And what I mean by that, just in case no one understands that part,
explain.
Is whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, whoever else, keep them out of your relationship. Because one of the things you have to realize, if you talk about your partner to your family and friends, and you're criticizing that person, you're criticizing the relationship or what they do or whatever, then you are establishing how they are going to feel about your partner, especially if you're not going to leave. Okay, if you're going to leave, then whatever. But if you're not leaving, then you're making them dislike your partner. So that's going to make it harder for them. But also, too, a lot of times we have people that want to give us solicited or unsolicited advice. And that's based on their experiences in relationships. So that's where, I have a lot more people that they're not married, but they're just in a relationship, and they come in for couples counseling. They're dating and they come in for couples counseling, which I think is great, because they're trying to work on things ahead of time. They're like, because people think that sometimes that marriage is not, if you got problems when you're dating, marriage is not the answer. Getting married is not going to make things better. Just like having a child, if you have problems with your partner, having a child is not going to improve the relationship. You know what I mean? Now you've just added another factor that can make things that much tougher.
Sure. Okay, this is really good. So it just seems like we're just segueing into the next question. So based on your practice, what are the top 3 reasons for divorce? And you can provide some statistics of whatever.
So yes. So it's interesting because I was looking at kind of my years of, doing work with couples and just people that have come in with relationship concerns or what have you. And so for me, I would say, and I have some actual national stats here, which I think kind of goes hand in hand, but I was looking at poor communication, people don't address issues as they happen. And so I think what happens is that people over the course of a relationship, things have occurred that maybe someone did not speak their truth, or they don't talk about what they need or how they felt about it. And so then as a result, those things are allowed to fester. And then at some point, people are like, I'm done. Or they are communicating and their partner's not listening. I think it's unmet needs and expectations, and unmet needs could also be uncommunicated and expectations. So we expect something from somebody. And I think, and it's interesting because this goes back to where men and women tend to be different. And, and again, I hate to do that, because I feel like I'm stereotyping, but women tend to be natural nurturers. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I think we kind of operate in a space of anticipating what's needed. So we tend to anticipate a lot what our partner will need, and act accordingly. You know what I mean? However, what we have to realize is that men are not the same way. It's not that they can't be a nurturer. Of course they can, but I don't think they operate that way. They don't anticipate. Like, for what I've seen is that you need to be specific. You need to be specific and say, this is what you need, because I think men are, I'm sorry.
So not assume that they know how you're feeling.
Right. Not assume that they know what you need. And I've seen that a lot in sessions with couples where, the woman is saying, well, like, why doesn't he know that that's what I would want? I said, well, did you ever tell him? Or why does he not, or why does he know that that's not what I would want? Did you ever say anything? So I think that's just, I think that's a factor. So unmet needs and expectations, or uncommunicated needs and expectations. The other thing is, I think, getting together for the wrong reasons. People, like, again, that goes back to the relationship box. It's like, well, I want to be in this relationship. So something somebody is doing now, unless they make the decision to change, or unless they see that it's not functioning for them, or you've communicated to them that this doesn't work in the relationship, and they are like, what, I'm going to do something about this, I'm going to change, then that's okay. However, but we need to understand that there's certain things about people we just need to accept. You know what I mean? Especially if it's not something major, we need to just accept it. Like, this is how this person is. And so you have to weigh that in comparison to the totality of the person. Is this something that takes away who they are, or is it just like just something that's like a quirk that they have? Sure. But again, it depends on who it is, and it depends on what your needs and expectations are. So I just want to stress that, because you can't change a person. And a lot of times we think, well, if we get married, this person will change. If we have a child, this person will change. No, they won't. Not if they don't want to, or they don't see the need to. Okay. So, but according to an article that I pulled up on the National Institute of Health, they were saying the 3 top reasons for divorce were lack of commitment, infidelity or extramarital affairs, and too much conflict and arguing. So I will say that, how I say that I think it complements what I was saying is because a lot of times, based on unmet needs and expectations, can sometimes be a catalyst for infidelity. A lot of times people will talk about that. Like, well, I wasn't getting whatever I needed, at home. And it's not always about sex. So we need to remember that. That's not always about like sex per se, but there can be a lot of other things. Because, cheating starts way before sex happens. So we need to keep that in mind. You know what I mean? The infidelity, the extramarital affair, that happens way before there's actually any kind of physical contact sexually between the two people. So typically, yes. So, and then the poor communication and some other things that were on here about getting married too young, which is interesting. Financial problems, I think. But again, that goes back to communication. People don't talk about finances. They don't communicate. People may have different ideas about how finances are supposed to go or how they should spend their money. Substance abuse, domestic violence, health problems, lack of support from family, religious differences. And then there was like the last one, because this was like kind of like a top 10, the little or no premarital education. So there is this focus of people like really having some conversations before you decide to get married. We see that a lot of times people do premarital counseling. I know I've done that with some couples. And that's where you kind of talk about like, how things are going to be, So yeah. So those are but my top 3 again, those are my top 3, which.
Okay. So we have this relationship box, and So we're in this relationship already. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't use this relationship box the way we were supposed to. So we're in a relationship. What is it that you would recommend couples do when they find out, or if they find out that there are issues that they won't negotiate on, but they do love each other? So what happens? What happens if you didn't do it the right way? How do couples build a relationship? What are the maybe three of the things that they should do, or come together and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is what we should do. We want to savor this relationship. How do we go about doing that?
Okay, so I know I feel like you're taking me right into like one of my sessions. So,
Okay.
so one of the things is I think we need to establish like what the end goal is. You know what I mean? Like, are both people feeling like the relationship can be salvaged? Because that's key to me. That is a key part. Like, are you committed to working on the relationship? Because again, we go back to the work that's going to be needed. And then once that's established, because sometimes that isn't the case. Sometimes one person is like, I'm done, or there have been things that have happened that this person's like, I can't come back from that. And then the other person's like, well, wait a minute, I want this relationship to work. So we have to really kind of establish that there's like both people on the same page. But I think also the establishing and communicating what's needed, what each person needs from each other. Sometimes that's also about healing some unhealed wounds, some things that have happened in a relationship, oftentimes, because I like to have people to try to like clean the slate, I like to call it.
Okay.
And so that cleaning the slate, because oftentimes people will bring up things from the past that have happened. And those things from the past are still right up on top on the surface. And so when this person is interacting, so you think about like infidelity, for instance, and there's a lot of information out there and research that shows that, couples can come back from infidelity. I'm not going to say it's easy, but they can come back from that if they're committed to each other. However, what often happens is that there's infidelity. There's really no conversation about it. There's no processing it. There's no way of people's feelings to be expressed or what have you. And the couple goes on. And then what happens is that infidelity is still in the room.
I see.
So the feelings associated, right, with that are still in the room. So whenever that person interacts with their partner, they're interacting with them through the, I don't trust you, I'm going to constantly bring this up. You know what I mean? This is something that really hurt me, because they haven't processed their feelings related to it. And so I think that can be with pretty much any major issue that happens with a couple, is that if it's not spoken about, because we all oftentimes think, well, we're over the situation, so it's not still going to manifest itself. But yes, it will, because it's hurt. It's hurtful stuff. And it's sometimes it can even be traumatic. Sometimes it can trigger past trauma that individuals may have had in other relationships, people leaving, people not trustworthy or whatever. It can cause us to question a lot of things. Because you got to think a lot when you decide to be with someone in a relationship, a lot goes into that. There's a great amount of vulnerability that we have in true, genuine, authentic relationships. And that's how it should be. But when you add in things that are hurtful and situations that may be hurtful, words that may be said that can't be taken back, actions that happen that can't be taken back, all of that cracks away at that foundation. And when people don't process that, then that's how relationships really start to struggle and to crumble. So that communication about what's needed and that cleaning the slate sometimes is necessary. I think the other thing too is taking time. I always say, like, if there's any place where mindfulness is key, it's in relationships, because a lot of times we're trying to predict what's going to happen. You can't predict what's going to happen in a relationship. You don't know. So we have to stay in the moment to really enjoy the relationship and take our time to work on the relationship, but also to get to know the person that's in front of us. And like I said, we don't take a lot of time. So if you're dating, like I said, if you're dating and things aren't good, marriage is not going to make it better. So you don't want to rush into the next stage of the relationship if the stage that you're in right now is not like good. And a lot of people do that. And then they get married and they're miserable. Then they add children to it, and then the focus on the children. And then eventually 15, between that 15 to 20 to 25 year mark, somebody's like, I'm done and I'm out of here. And the partner is like, well, why? What happened? Like they feel blindsided because
Mm-hmm.
we have to communicate about what's going on throughout. And it doesn't mean that every other day you got to sit down and talk about your relationship. It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that when things occur, it's good to just have a dialogue. It's good to have open communication so that you and this person that you've decided to spend the rest of your life with have an ongoing, conversation with each other, that you're continually learning each other, because that's the other part too. We don't stay the same.
That's
So if
true.
someone gets married in their 20s, they're not going to be the same in their 30s or their 40s or their 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not still with that same person. Certainly there's some fundamental things that are still the same, but we have to continue to get to know each other. You never fully know someone
That's
because we're
really
human and we're evolving, and that's what we're supposed to do.
That's good. That's good. I love the last piece that you just said there. Perfect. So we're gonna start to bring it in. But what
Mhm.
advice would you give single men and women, regardless of their age? Now, I wasn't going to bring this individual into the conversation, someone who was called a guru of relationships. I wasn't going to bring that in, but there's this stereotype, or there's these words out there that kind of say once you reach a certain age, that you're not going to be able to find anyone. So you have people who are single, men and women who are single, haven't found the right one. And so, what should they do to make sure that they are ready for the relationship? So there's the relationship box, but there's
Mhm.
some things that perhaps they should be doing while they're waiting for Mr. or Mrs. Right to come. So, what are some of the things that they should do, irregardless of their age?
Right. Because one, I would say, I think whoever that so-called relationship guru was, like, that's not accurate to say that, okay, a person of a certain age, like, oh, you're not going to meet anybody. Like, that
Mhm.
doesn't make any sense. You see couples all the time that they've met later in life, and I would also challenge to the idea of the Mrs. Right or Mr. Right or what have you.
Okay,
Like, the
good.
idea is you need Mrs. Right for you or Mr. Right for you.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that we have to establish what it is that we're looking for. We have to know that. So if you're in that stage of, like, and it's not my quote, but it's like almost like that Jan Van Zandt, in the meantime, like while you're in
Mhm.
between relationships or what have you,
Yeah,
you're
yes.
working on you
Mhm.
because you want to make sure that you're ready. Because granted, you want to make sure that when you go into a relationship, that your stuff is dealt with, your stuff is settled, so that you can make sure that one, you can know what your needs are and what you're bringing to the table, and making sure that what you're receiving from your partner or from this person that may potentially be your partner is also going to benefit you, that you're mutually benefiting each other.
Mhm.
So I always say, like, and that has me to go back to that, your negotiables and non-negotiables. What are things that you're like, these are things that absolutely I need to have. And some would say, that's a lot, like, oh, it's too much, but here's the thing: when you don't get it, you're not going to be happy in those relationships. So either it becomes something that you're like, this is a non-negotiable, or you are open to, you're willing to say, well, you know what, maybe that's not realistic. Like, an example could be when people have the more tangible stuff, like, oh, this person needs to make this amount of money.
Okay.
Is that realistic? Are you kind of, cutting yourself short, or, you know what I mean? You're limiting your pool of people? The other thing too, I think, is, again, you have to know yourself. You have to deal with your own issues. You know what I mean? Because we're going to bring those into a relationship. Like I said, this stuff floats to the top.
Mhm.
So, and understanding that, to take our time, if you're trying to be with somebody for the rest of your life, then you got time. You don't
Mhm.
need to rush into anything,
Good.
because it's the rushing that causes us to miss the things, and miss those flags, those red flags, those things that are glaring in front of us. But
Yes.
because we have the relationship box, and we're like, I'm on this 3-year, 5-year plan, you know what I mean? Then we're so focused on that we're missing, that is this person the person that you should be committed to for the rest of your life? Because if that's what you're working towards, and if both of you have that mutual understanding, that's what you're working towards, then that means there's a commitment to not only being with each other for the rest of your lives, but working on the things that you need to work on to sustain the relationship for the rest of your lives.
Such wonderful advice. Such wonderful advice.
Well,
Okay,
I'm glad.
I want you to have the final remarks. Tell me I mean, you've already given us plenty of advice, but I want you to sort of just kind of summarize it if you wouldn't mind.
So I guess in summary, I would say the main thing is, take your time. Look, relationships, there's a lot that goes into relationships. There's a lot that, we bring, and remember, some of the stuff that we're bringing into relationships are from our past. Everybody hasn't had good, healthy relationships in our lives. We haven't. And a lot of times that started during a time when we had no control over what relationships we were in or who we were around or anything like that. So acknowledging that, but also acknowledging that not only are you bringing your stuff, but so is your partner. And so the idea is, and I don't believe that, hurt people. I think what happens is that hurt people where they don't recognize that they're hurting people, may unfortunately in life may unfortunately, unintentionally hurt someone. But I really believe that, people want to, we all have that need to be with someone. We do. I think that's human nature, or to be around people. Mm-hmm. So we have to define what it is that we need for ourselves. And I think we need to make sure that we know that we're worthy of getting what we need from others. And sometimes if it's not this person that meets that need, then, be confident enough in yourself to know when you need to move on.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so very much. Thank you for
You're welcome.
Your expertise, your explanations. It was truly wonderful having you here and having you to share so much to everyone who'll be listening. Thank you, Dr. Wiley. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So now, before we end, please again tell us your pages so that if anyone wants to tune in to Dr. Rob Wiley, they're able to do so. So where are you?
Yes. So I'm on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. And so I do a show every Sunday. It's usually up by like midday Sunday. And I talk about various topics. This past week, I just talked about, how to let go of the need for control. And so, it's really about disseminating information to contribute to, our overall wellness, whether it's about mental health, whether it's about coping strategies, what have you. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And, looking sometime during the summer of trying to do some other workshops and some groups and stuff. So, there's other things coming down the pipe. I'm quite busy, but I love what I do. So I'm really appreciative of this opportunity. This was really great to be able to talk about something that I just kind of leave to my, people I work with, the relationship box and that kind of stuff, but not realizing. And I actually may have to do a show on this because I
think you should. I
think there was so much we pulled together for this. I said, I think this is a show.
There you go. There you go. All right. Wonderful. Thank you again. And we'll be in touch real soon. And I want to make sure that the audience listening has a wonderful, wonderful Memorial Day holiday. Stay well. And we'll talk to you later on Arby's Kitchen Talk. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.